Okay, so welcome back, and a reminder that your next speech is due 2 weeks today on March 15. That will be your informative speech. It's your first larger speech. It's a minimum 7-minute speech. It should be between 6.5 and 7.5 minutes. So please work on keeping it within that time frame. Okay, now I just want to go over the journey that we have been on as we have been working on the topics of public speaking. And when we started, I talked about why learn to speak publicly. We looked at models of communication, elements of public speaking, and then prepped talking about your first speech and dealing with speech anxiety. And next day, I'm going to make a shift. And the next day, I'm going to change the topic from what I have. I'm shifting things around a bit. I'm actually going to do the talk that I have booked for March 22. I'm going to do it on the 3rd, next Wednesday of this week, and it will be on self-talk. The issue, is it helpful or harmful? So we're going to talk about self-talk, 10 really top 10 traps to self-talk. So we're going to talk about that. That'll be on Wednesday of this week. But we dealt with listening. We've dealt with the issue of credibility and speaking ethically from a credible perspective. We talked about audience analysis. We talked about selecting the subject and the purpose of the speech. We talked about the introduction and the conclusion of a speech. We talked about the nonverbals, the other message. It's not just about words, it's more than that. And today we're going to talk about choosing your approach, the mode of delivery is choosing your approach of the delivery of your speech. And then we're going to talk about self-talk next day. And then I'm going to talk about speaking to inform and to persuade. We'll go a little more on understanding those two speeches. And then really, I am working through another idea of a YouTube speech that you'll watch, and then we'll debrief about that speech for that next day before you actually have to prepare and present or develop, record, and send via YouTube your speech. So again, I do remind you that we do kind of do this mode, we do this approach just because of COVID-19. Normally, I'm in the classroom with my students. That is my preferred way of doing it, and there in regard to teaching it, but that's not the way we're able to do it. And so we make those adaptations that are necessary. So a reminder to those of you who will be receiving this recording, because you're not actually in class session, it's important for you to watch it and then to let me know that you have received and that you watched this one. And when you say I've watched it, could you even just write and say, I watched the presentation on mode of delivery, so that I have that connected with my attendance sheet, etc. That would be helpful. Thank you. So I want to talk about today the mode of delivery. We need to be aware that there is more than one way of delivering a speech. And we have to think about what is the best way of doing our delivery. And there are a lot of factors you have to think about. The audience you're going to be facing. You got to think about the material that you're presenting. You have to think about the circumstances in your presentation. And you have to think about you. You need to know you. You need to become a student of who you are. What factors impact you that can affect your mode of delivery? And then you have to think about the circumstances in the present. So first of all, just knowing yourself. For me, I have shared that I have some brain damage. And in light of that, it does impact me when it comes to public speaking. And for instance, I cannot have too many words in front of me. It's too confusing for me. My brain It's not because I am dyslexic. I am not. It's just a matter of too many words can actually make me panic. And so I know there's certain modes of delivery that don't work well for me unless I have to use them based on circumstances. Um, and I have to make adjustments in regard to how I'm going to do presentations in light of my circumstance. You need to study yourself. And that doesn't mean say, oh, I'm shy, so I'll never do this. No, knowing you're shy means that you're going to have to think that through and how are you going to deliver in light of the fact that you're shy. So you need to think through you, but you also need to think through the prevailing experience of the day. Let me give an example of this. I mentioned to you that I go to church and we have a pastor. He's 33 years old. We actually have about four or five pastors, but the lead pastor is 33 years old. He's quite young. But he's very, very gifted and very, very mature for his age. He's older than his age. And when I first was, he was an associate pastor. He became the lead pastor years later. The lead pastor years ago basically impacted him on speaking, on being perfect. And you can't be perfect in public speaking because we're humans. And the old pastor believed that there's one way you do it. You write your sermon out and you read it, in essence. And so that's what this young man was doing. And when we would talk about preaching, I'd tell him, you're losing your audience. You have good stuff, good material, but you don't keep us honest because you do not look at us. You do not connect us with what the content is because you don't show your emotion in your face because we don't see your face. You're reading it. And so he began to try to change and so forth. In fact, his professor of preaching at Axe Seminaries, which is a part of Trinity Western University, was a former student of mine years ago, Dr. Kent Anderson. And Dr. Anderson teaches preaching. That's his major. He's no longer with Axe Seminaries. As of yesterday, he completed his presidency. He's going to be a president of a university in Manitoba. And he told my lead pastor when he was a student of his, don't just do the manuscript. Don't just read to us. Well, circumstances happened. I was meeting with my lead pastor, the 33-year-old, about 3 weeks ago, we were talking about preaching. And I said, hey, I noticed some things about you. He says, yeah, what did you notice? I said, I noticed because of circumstances, you're sitting at a table now. He says, yeah, I do that because it allows me not to move around as much. I still move in this chair a bit. But he said, in light of COVID-19, it's more difficult. I said, I get that. He said, do you notice anything else? I said, yes. I said, you're not using a manuscript mode of delivery anymore. And I said, congratulations, it's what I've been wanting you to get away from. And he laughed and he said, well, the reason I'm not doing that is because of COVID-19. He said, now we record the sermon on Thursdays, have it ready. And he said, I'm without an audience and it would be easy just to look down and read. But he said, when I looked at the camera, I realized I can't look down all the time. I've got to be looking up into the camera because people need to see I'm looking at them. Even if it's in a camera and we're watching on YouTube or we're watching on a video feed that allows us to see him later, 2 to 3 days later. So circumstances forced him to change, and it changed his mode of delivery, which was in this case to the better. So the mode of delivery is something that we all need to give serious thought to in regard to speaking. And you need to be a student of yourself. You need to be a student of the audience you're speaking to. You need to be a student of the circumstances you're speaking into. You need to be a student of the dynamics around the big picture of the world, in this case, a pandemic. And it's shaping and reshaping even how we deliver. I mean, listen, I'm used to being in front of you in classroom, and here I am sitting in this office in my upstairs in my home here, and I'm speaking this way, and I have had to learn how to do this, and I've had to learn how to record and get the recordings out. And sometimes people are not getting the recordings because for some reason YouTube's saying it, they can't deliver it, and yet they can. So all these things have changed the way we're doing things. And I'm also finding, by the way, you see I'm drinking a little bit more, is that in this room, it's a little drier and my voice gets drier faster. So everything is radically changed, but it all has an impact on what we do, when we do, and how we do. And today we're talking about how, mode of delivery, how are you actually delivering the speech? And that's really important for you to think about. So, mode of delivery, there are really 4 modes of delivery, of which there are 3 of them that you can choose from, or you can work it through a little bit different to fit the way you want to do it. And so we're going to look at these 4 modes of delivery. Okay. The first one I want to talk about is the manuscript mode of delivery. This is the way, involves the complete writing out of the speech and then simply reading it to your audience, which is really not a healthy thing to just write it out and then just read it. And we'll show you, because what I want to do is talk about the strengths and the limitations on each of these modes. There are 3 that I'll talk about that you can use in this class. The 4th one, there's 4. The 4th one is under certain circumstances of which we won't have in this class. So you can use any of these modes of delivery, but everyone has strengths and every one of them has a limitation, and you need to be aware of those limitations too. So let's look at those. The first mode of delivery is the manuscript mode. You write it out, you read it. There are advantages of this mode of delivery. To start with, it prevents a slip of the tongue. It prevents the slip of the tongue, or miswording, or distortions. And you don't want to have said something you didn't mean to say, a slip of the tongue. You don't want to accidentally put a word in you had no intention of putting it in, or saying the word inappropriately or wrongly, miswording. And you don't want a word or sets of words that creates an image of something that really is not what you wanted to create, a distortion. And so the advantage is sitting by yourself in your office, sitting by yourself in your study room, sitting by yourself in your home, where you actually sit down and you write out your speech, word for word. You write it out. And then what you do is that you read it. When you read it, you're not going to have a slip of the tongue. You're not going to have a miswording because you have worked on getting just the right words to ensure no distortions take place. It's a real advantage. However, there are disadvantages. We'll get to that. But it does prevent the slip of the tongue. There was a situation that happened many years ago with a president of the United States, President Carter, back in the 1970s, a long time ago. And Mr. Carter, who was then president, was working on trying to create a peace accord between Israel and Egypt. Okay, he was trying to work on this peace accord. And he had the president of Egypt in the United States. And they went to Camp David where they could work quietly on things. And it was a pretty tough job. People were not expecting much. But they got something. Mr. Sadat, the president of Egypt, was willing to make concessions, and so was Israel, so that peace could actually happen. and everybody was celebrating. There was at least a breakthrough. And Mr. Carter, the president of the United States, went back with Mr. Sadat to the White House in the United States, and they made the announcement. And now Mr. Sadat's going to go back to his country, Egypt, but they decide that they're going to have this banquet to honor him. And at the banquet, Mr. Carter, the president of the United States, gives a toast to the president. And what it is like a little wine glass, not this, and this is Coca-Cola, a little wine glass, and everybody holds it. And Mr. Carter gives a speech, and then after the speech says, to the president of Egypt, and everybody takes a glass and they tink the glasses together, and then they take a little drink. Except something went wrong. Mr. Carter didn't read his notes that were scripted. He decided to ad-lib. And after he talks about this great visionary man, Mr. Sadat, and talks about the fact that he's now going to do well to work for peace in the Middle East. He's a visionary man. And he talks all these great things. And then he's talking about him. He says, tells the people, please take your glasses. And now let us salute this great president of Israel. Oops. Mr. Sadat is the president of Egypt, who's been at war with Israel, but now they're trying to find a common ground. He got him as the president of Israel, but he's the president of Egypt. Oops. Now, if he had been reading his script, he wouldn't have made that mistake. The whole world heard it. What a mistake. It allows for exactness. So if you use a manuscript mode of delivery, it allows for exactness. You see, there's something you want to say, but you want to say it with exactness. You don't want a slip of the tongue. You don't want any miswording. You don't want the people to get any distortions. You want the people to get exactly, specifically what you mean. And so you want to use words that are very specific to that. So you write them out and you read those words to ensure exactness. So you don't want to get up front and say to the people, we now are defeating COVID-19 because we now have the vaccine. Well, you do have the vaccines coming, but if you say we have the vaccines, that says, oh, you already have them, get them out. What you mean is we have the vaccines now created, and now we're waiting for the vaccines to come so that we can give people the needle, immunize them from the COVID-19. So you want to say exactness. You want exactness, and you got to use just the right words. It can strengthen fluency. I mean, think about it. You've written out the speech, and now what you're doing is you're giving the speech. You're giving the speech. You're literally giving the speech right now. You're not having to think about what you're going to say. You've already thought it through. You're reading it. And because of that, if you just read it, it's going to be fluent. And people are impacted by fluency. Fluency does create trust because you've prepared it. You've thought it through. You're coming across as a person well prepared. People trust you for that. And so that becomes important. And so it strengthens fluency. It can eliminate the filler words. It can eliminate the filler words. And there are often filler words that we use. And in your speech, if you're reading the words, you're not going to say, oh, I need to sound more natural. I'll throw a couple and-ums in there. You don't do that. It helps to eliminate filler words. It allows you to say specifically what you prepared to say. and now you're simply going to say them. So it's very, very powerful. This is a fine approach. It's not my approach. I do not particularly like this approach. On occasion, when it's appropriate, I've used it. I've had to make some statements in some organizations, and I needed to use carefully worded thoughts. I can't speak in the moment. I have to have thought those thoughts out beforehand and then read them. So there's that advantage to it. However, there are disadvantages to the manuscript mode of delivery in regard to presentation. I'm going to take a look at those. One is potential eye contact. You see, you've written it out. You're going to read it. And all too often, what happens is that people look down and they forget about the audience in front of them. They are looking down and they are just reading it, reading it, reading it, reading it. I've had students get up front of class thinking that they were quite prepared to give the speech, and they stood up front and suddenly they realized something. Everybody was looking at them. And all of a sudden they weren't very comfortable with that. And so they put their head down and they read. See, we put your head down, I don't have to look at the audience. I know they're there, but I don't care because I'm not looking at them. I'm just reading. Trouble is, a lot of your message gets lost. It's necessary to look at your audience. It's necessary to have eye contact. Critical. Potential limited gestures. Happens very easily. As you're reading, I have seen this over and over again, where people look down, they don't think about gestures, they only think about reading the words that they have in front of them, believing that's all that they need to think about, and so they read. And what do they do with their hands or whatever? Take their hands. If it's a podium, often they put their hands on either side, they grab a hold of the end of the podium, and they hold on for dear life. So their hands are never mobile, never involved in public speaking. The reality is that your hands, your arms, your shoulder, your head movement, even moving and walking around are all part of nonverbal factors and gestures that are valuable to your audience because they read more into what you're saying when they see the body language. We talked about this already last day. The issue of the importance of body language. Gestures are critical, whether it be walking around using your legs or whether it's using your arms, etc. It potentially limits vocal expression. All too often when a person's reading, it is very easy to go into the monotone. To simply read flatlined, just like this. Disadvantages of using this mode of delivery. One is potential limited eye contact. Second, it is potential limited gestures. And third, most definitely, potential limited vocal expression. There is no expression in this. And you forget about the fact that your voice has life to it and you're to have life. Let's look at the disadvantages of this mode of delivery. Reality is that there's limited eye contact. That happens very easily. Very limited gestures. People just quit thinking. And then, you know what? Vocal expression gets limited very easily without even thinking about it. There's a difference how I just spoke now and how I delivered earlier. And that can be a major disadvantage of the mode of delivery that involves just the manuscript. Potential limited spontaneity. And that certainly is a case that takes place. Things happen in the moment. You cannot, if you're a perfectionist, you're in all sorts of deep trouble because you want everything to be perfect. But the fact is, you're speaking to an audience that's not perfect. Sometimes people are sneezing. Some people get up and walk out. Some people come walking in. Sometimes there's a crying baby. There's all sorts of things going on, unexpected stuff. Things can happen before you get up and speak. I've literally been asked to speak at places, and prior to my getting up, the people had an announcement. You know, this person, whoever the name of the person is, he just passed away. He died. And all the people go, oh. It was like a kick in the gut for them. Well, if I get up there and pretend I didn't hear that and I'm the guest speaker, it really is an insensitive moment. And the fact is, now, how do you become spontaneous? How do you say to the people, I am so sorry to hear this. by the way that you groaned, I can tell you were shocked and disappointed and saddened by his passing away. And I think that's important, that we understand grief. See, I'm spontaneously speaking, and in that moment, the people, they're so appreciative of that. And when that happens, they're going to listen to you. So spontaneity can go out the window. Another one is that there can be limited response to audience nonverbal feedback. Okay? It really limits your ability to respond to nonverbal feedback. You're reading away and you look up and you look at your audience and you can see that they're kind of looking at you like, not sure I understand what you just said. Or, oh, I'm so tired. Oh. People can do that to you while you're speaking. That's nonverbal feedback. All sorts of nonverbal feedback happening. Goes on all the time. And you have to be aware of that. It really limits your capacity to do that. What if your audience gives you the look of like, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you just said. Could you say it again? Well, the trouble is with this mode of delivery, it doesn't give you that freedom to do it naturally. And it comes across that way and the audience knows it. It could sound written versus spoken to your audience. And that happens all too easily. It sounds written. You know, if you memorize something and somebody says, hey, could you recite it? And you say yes. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. Everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. She has a da 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 da. It sounds written. It sounds like it has no life. It does not sound fresh. It does not sound like it's spoken. And there are people that say that's okay because if I don't use the spoken, then I won't make as many errors or any errors at all. The reality is that you're a human being and people don't expect you to be perfect. They expect you to be right. And there's a huge difference. Now, you want to be well prepared and you want to give as good information as possible. But the fact is that you're going to have those moments that you're going to sound human. But you know, if it's written out, you've taken out the human factor. See, as you're writing it out and you read it and you go, oh, I don't like that word. And you cross that word out and you put another word in, you're trying to perfect it. Now you want a good speech, I'm not questioning that. But the fact is, the human factor has to be brought into it. The memorized mode of delivery. It's a great, not to memorize, the manuscript mode of delivery. It's a good approach. It's not mine. I don't prefer it. But it has disadvantages. It has advantages. Well, let's look at the second mode of delivery. It is the memorized mode of delivery. So we have the manuscript mode, and now we have a different form of the manuscript mode. See, the manuscript mode of delivery involves you writing out manuscript and then memorizing the speech. So you write it out, then you memorize it, and then you deliver it without notes. You don't go up with notes. All your notes are up here. You've memorized it. And it's a very powerful, a very effective way. If you are really good at memorized mode of delivery, this is one that is really worthy of considering. Now, there are advantages up to this mode of delivery that is very important to be aware of. And that is, one, there are no notes to distract you. You know, have you ever given a speech and you had the words written out and there's little tiny words like the sheet of paper right here? I got little tiny words up there. And you're like, where am I? Oh, where am I? Third grade. Oh, yeah. And your eyes are looking at all the sentences at once, and you're looking for that one sentence that you need. Not so easy. Well, you don't worry about that when you do the memorized mode. You've memorized it. You have it up here, and you can get up front. No notes in front of you. No notes. That is absolutely incredibly powerful to your audience. It says to them, wow, he or she really knows his or her material. They're not using notes. They're looking at us the whole time, which involves stronger eye contact that's established. looking at your audience, looking into the eyes of your audience, or the perception that you are looking into the eyes of your audience. If you're talking to a large audience, you can't see everybody. I've talked to audiences over 5,000 and 6,000 people at one time. Well, there's no way I could see all their faces. I could see all their eyes. It's impossible. But when you look generically at your whole audience, it gives the impression that you are looking at people, and that critically is important. The memorized mode of delivery, you see the speech is in your head, and you're able to look at your audience. You're able to look around and as you're speaking, to actually look at people, and it gives them the impression you're very personable. You really, really do care. Why? You look at us, you acknowledge us with your eyes. It allows for greater gestures because you have no notes you're holding, you have no information that's in your way. It's up here. And so you're able to move around and to use gestures and to look at people as you're using gestures because you don't have notes. They don't distract you. It's up here. This is where it's happening. There's greater preparation that's needed, which means that you know your speech a whole lot better. And that's really important. You know your material really well. You see, you have to prepare the speech. You have to think about it, outline it. Then you have to write it out. Then you have to memorize it. That's a lot of work. But this is how some people give their speeches and do incredibly well in doing it this way. The memorized mode of delivery is very powerful. You know why? You have to have it well memorized. After writing it, thinking about it, writing it out, then you have to memorize it. Man, you're going to know your stuff forward and backwards because you spent so much time in its development. It allows for the mastery of words. See, words are powerful and they impact. And you can think there are words that are bright descriptives, and then there are other words that are devoid of description, and what you're sharing becomes across as dry. But when you begin to use words, you can use new words. You show the mastery of words, and when you show the mastery of words, people are impressed with you. It's a powerful advantage. It's a great one. There are variations in voices potentially maximized. You see, again, you are looking at your audience. You have the speech up here. You're thinking about everything that you do in the presentation of it. You are able to not have notes in your way. You're able to look at your audience. You're able to show greater gestures. You're able to demonstrate great preparation, and you have the mastery of words. And then you think about your voice and how well you use your voice. Is this a moment of excitement? Is this a moment of endearment? Is this a moment of sharing suffering? Whatever it is, people become directly involved in this speech. Better control of volume exists. Better control of volume exists. And that's really something you want to see happen. You want to see all these 7 things all happening. And there's such great advantages to your audience when you're able to use these to really come across in a powerful, significant way. But this mode of delivery also comes with its baggage. It comes with a problem or sets of problems. And if you don't know or understand them and you try to use them, you can actually come across as not being a good public speaker. So let's look at those disadvantages. One is potentially limits responding to audience nonverbal feedback. See, as your memorized mode, you see the script is up here and you're talking to your audience, you're looking at your audience and you're sharing, and your audience is taking this in with no problem at all. taking it in. But all of a sudden they don't understand something. They kind of give you the look like, huh? I didn't understand that. What? And they give you nonverbal language. But if you use the memorized mode of delivery, it's hard to stop and go back and give an explanation, because then you have to figure out, now, where in the world did I leave off? And get back into it. And then that's when you potentially could start forgetting. So you got a major problem here. It limits responding to audience nonverbal feedback. It can sound memorized. It can sound memorized, and that's not something that you really want to have happen. You don't want to have it come across sounding memorized. See, when it sounds memorized, again, it can have that sound that lulls people because it's not a cadence that allows for freshness at all. So it's a disadvantage to you. The audience might feel they are being manipulated. Politicians use this mode of delivery. Like in free countries, we have elections. And speakers who are speaking to an audience wanting to persuade them to consider voting have to be very careful, because they memorize their speeches because they share them all over the place, okay? And so after a while, it's just like, I know the speech forward and backwards, and it's so easy to do this. But an audience can be listening to you and saying, man, you're manipulating us. Here's a way. A person running for public office says something, and something like, we need to lower taxes so that more money is in your wallet. And that person stops and they pause. Why do they pause? They want people to clap. Yeah, man, I want more money in my wallet. I don't want government to have all my money. I can do better with my money than the government can do. But sometimes people don't agree with that. And I've seen it where the person has spoken in this way, and then the audience just sat there looking at them, not clapping, not responding. And the politician suddenly saying, oh, I better continue on here. So it can be embarrassing. Another disadvantage of the mode of delivery, and this is a big one, probably when you were thinking about this, when you're this mode of delivery, this is probably the one that you were thinking about. Well, what happens if I forget? Ooh, that can happen all too easily. You can give your speech or be giving your speech, and suddenly you blank out. All of a sudden you can't remember everything you were saying or going to say, and you're not sure where to go. I was at Oregon State University teaching this very course, and it was our second speech of the semester. I was sitting at back of the room, and I had spoken about this whole area of mode of delivery for the students to think this through for the next speech. And this gal, she knew she was a good memorizer. She said, that is my mode of delivery. Oh, yes. Beautiful. I get to do it the way I know I can do it. So she wrote out her speech and she memorized it. She got up front and she began speaking. I'm sitting in the back of the room and I have my pen in my hand and I'm writing notes of evaluation as I'm listening to her speech. She's doing a good job. The audience is really involved. They're listening very carefully to what she's saying, because, man, does she know her stuff. And I'm at the back with my pen and I'm writing. I put my head down, I'm writing away, and all of a sudden there's this silence. And, it only takes about that long and people suddenly realize something's not right. Okay? This is how long it takes. Are you listening? Uh-oh, that's too long. Silence is not always golden. Certainly not when you're giving a speech. People can immediately look at you and say, you lost your place. You've forgotten. Had this happened, had a student who had heard me talk about how important and how valuable memorization can be. She knew she was good, so she was doing it. And I'm at the back, like I said, I'm writing away, and all of a sudden there's a silence, like I said. I look up, and I see her just standing there. She's frozen. She's thinking. Her eyes are trying to look into her brain. What was to come next? What was to come next? And we're all sitting there as the audience going, oh, please, please get it. Oh, please, 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 please. And all of a sudden she went, oh, and she gave a speech again. And we all, as the audience went, don't do that to us again. Well, the next speech came. She did it again. She forgot. Partway through the speech, all of a sudden she blanked out. We all sucked in air. She all stood there with her eyes going up, looking. And I was, oh, yeah, and she went on. I was so sore in the shoulders when she was finished. Could not believe what she had done to us. It was quite painful, to say the least. She'd forgotten. Well, one more speech to go. Oh, no. She's going to try again. Oh, please don't forget. Oh, no. She's forgotten again. Oh, tension, tension, tension. Oh, she got it back again. Oh, hurry up. Just finish. Don't do this to me again. I'm glad this is your last speech. Forgetting's a reality. This mode of delivery makes it difficult adapting to unexpected circumstances. It makes it very difficult to really respond to unexpected circumstances, because unexpected circumstances happen. In fact, I guarantee you, in public speaking, unexpected circumstances will happen to you at some point. And you have to know how you're going to respond. It just happens. And it can make it very, very difficult. And if it's a memorized mode of delivery, you're in all sorts of trouble. I was speaking at a church, and I already shared this across the border in the United States. And a woman from the occult, came to disrupt the service. She was sitting at the end of a bench to my far right. I'm up front, I'm speaking. And she was all in black, and she had a black hat on. And then all of a sudden, I happened to look over, and she was standing, and she had a veil pulled over her eyes. And it was unnerving. And it was an unexpected circumstance. And I had to make adjustments as I'm speaking. The audience basically didn't even know about her. They were focused on my presentation. But be aware, it's real. And so the unexpected circumstance makes it difficult, and you might have to adapt. Could be somebody coughing, could be a crying baby. It could be an announcement made just before you start, and you've got your speech memorized, but they stand up and they say, this person just passed away yesterday, and the people all grow, oh, he was a nice person, or she was. And so what happens is you have to adapt. You need to kind of minister to people, even if you're a guest speaker, or even if you're not. How do you adjust to that information? You got to think that through. It's not easy. It is not easy, to say the least. The third mode of delivery is the extemporaneous mode of delivery. This involves thorough preparation of the speech. You, the speaker, then strictly use an outline of the speech as a reminder of the thoughts, the points, the illustrations to be used in the speech. This is very different. You see, you don't go up with a whole lot of notes. In a little way, it's partially memorized, but really, it's not memorized word for word. It's memorized in the sense that you know what you want to speak about for each of the points, but those are all written on a piece of paper so you can find the point. See, if I were speaking right now as a public speaker, not as a professor, and I were not to use PowerPoints, on my outline, I wanted to speak about all these major points, I would have in my outline, part one would be the manuscript. I would have that written in large letters, and then I would actually use a color coded, and I have color, excuse me, all sorts of colors here that I use to write out. In fact, oops, I got another one down here. I just saw this one. I've got gold, I've got green, I've got blue, I've got pink, I've got yellow, I've got orange, and I use all of these when I write out my outline, and I will circle them. This color is used mostly if I'm talking from the Bible, if it's a verse, and I write it, I can highlight it. This one I use in a couple ways, like when I have a major point finished in my outline, and I draw a line underneath it to separate it from the next point, so it's easy to see. I use this one as to show important illustrations. I use this one because it helps mark up the main points. For instance, if I were talking about 3 major points here, it would be manuscript, memorized, extemporaneous, and the extemporaneous mode of delivery would be highlighted in blue on a sheet of paper. Okay, I use this one to give the markings, like where it says the Roman numeral number 3 beside extemporaneous. I give that so I know the colors. And gold gets used in a couple other ways. So all this helps me always keep myself really well organized so that it's easy to follow. But all I got is an outline. I don't have all the words. I'm not reading a manuscript. I do not have it completely memorized. I know what I'm doing. So it really, I use those pens just to outline to help see where the different spots are in the outline. And then I just have the key thoughts. A key thought might be number 1, manuscript. Number 2 would be memorized. Number 3, extemporaneous. Those are my, and then the fourth thought that I have, my main points. And then my illustrations or my stories that I might use. Okay. For instance, I could say, I want to talk about this one topic about moments of seeing people give care to somebody very sick. Let's say that's the main thought I'm talking about, but I want to illustrate it. Well, then I use that yellow to do that. I have it written out, then I give the color code, and all I say is something like the doctor walking into the room with a little girl sick with cancer. Now that doesn't mean anything to you, but see, I see the title and I know there's a story. Tell the story. And it's the story of a medical doctor who he's doing his rounds, who walks into a room in a hospital, and lying on the bed is this little girl. She's incredibly sick with cancer, terribly sick. She might die. But her grandmother's with her, and her grandmother has her totally wrapped around her, and she's holding her as she's lying on the bed. And the grandmother's lying there, and she's groaning as if the cancer is what she's experiencing. But this little girl that has cancer, but grandma is holding her, and she's groaning. The little girl's just lying still. Somebody's feeling the pain for her. And then the doctor quietly walked out. He didn't dare disrupt this. He said, I was on sacred ground. A grandmother feeling the pain of the granddaughter. See, but all I would do is write something like the doctor walking into the room where the grandmother holding little girl with cancer. And I can look at that and I know the story and I tell it. That's all you have in the extemporaneous. You just got a basic outline. A couple of spots might be a few more things here and there, but it basically is kept as strictly an outline, and then you speak from that. Okay. And that's what you do. What's the advantages of that mode of delivery? Well, one is the freedom from extensive notes. You don't have notes. You have an outline. You don't have something you can just sit and read. All you have is the outline. Potentially greater eye contact. Why? Well, because you don't have notes. You know, you're talking about the little girl lying in bed with the grandmother holding her. You're illustrating compassion for the person who's sick. You're looking at your audience as you tell your story because you know the story up here and you're not reading it because you can't. It's not there to be read. So you're able to look at your audience. And eye contact is one of the most powerful factors that shows you have credibility, because the audience sees you as being effective. You clearly prepared well because you're looking at them. Potentially greater use of gestures. You know, as you're speaking, see, you don't have script in front of you. Your script is in your mind. It's not even script, it's the main points. And all you have is that piece of paper with the main point, and you're telling the story, you're making the point, and etc. And that's all you use your outline for as you're sharing to your whole audience as you're speaking. And you're able to use your hands, use your head, use your shoulders, sometimes walking, sometimes standing still. But your audience becomes much more enthralled in what you're sharing. Potentially better vocal expression is used as you're sharing. See, a vocal expression is being used because your eye contact, your gestures, and your vocals all become what people hang themselves onto in regard to your speech as you're speaking. And this has tremendous impact on your audience. This is a powerful, powerful way of speaking. Greater spontaneity is experienced. See, as you're speaking, let's say something happens partway through or prior to your speaking. Let's say somebody gets up front and does share about something where somebody has suffered. You're able to acknowledge that. You're able to say, this is such an illustration that all of us need to understand. We take life and take it carefully because any moment life can change on us. It teaches us about the suffering, doesn't it? And then you're able to take and curve what the topic is with that moment. An audience goes like, wow, that's clean. You took a moment of what was happening to us in our group here, and you incorporated that into what you're going to speak about. You did that because you can bring spontaneity to it. So you can make that little detour because you got your outline that always brings you back to what you're going to speak on. There is greater freedom to respond to audience nonverbal feedback. You see, there are times that audiences will kind of be looking at you and might look at you like, I'm not sure I understood it. And then you say, I can see that maybe I should repeat, but rephrase what I just said to help you. You can do that because you know where your next outlet, your next point follows this. You're able to shift without any problems. Can't do it when it's manuscript. You can't do it when it's memorized. But this gives you such great freedom because nonverbal feedback, you're always getting nonverbal feedback from your audience. Please understand that's always going on, for good or for bad. It is going on. Greater preparation is needed, which translates into a positive perception of you as a speaker, a much more positive perception of you as the speaker, because you're prepared. You know your material, and that's powerful to your audience. So this is the mode that I use. I use extemporaneous mode. I use it because I understand my brain. Too many words. I can't take that. I need to be able to be connected to my audience. That's necessary for them to be connected to me. And that means we need to look at each other. And all those things are important. There are disadvantages of this mode of delivery. One, if the speaker is not prepared well, then they might end up just reading their outline with little content. Now, well, all you take up is an outline. You don't have anything else. If you get up there and panic and all you want to do is read, it'll take you a few minutes to read what will probably take you a half an hour, 40 minutes to give in a speech. I went to a retreat with a bunch of pastors years ago, and I was just a rookie. I was years ago. I was just a kid, young guy. I mean, I was in ministry, but I was really young. And I was listening to these older pastors, and they were talking about those moments of embarrassment, those moments when things didn't go the way they were supposed to go. And one of them shared the story. They're all laughing with each one's story. This one guy says, I remember I was training and I had taken the course in higher levels of public speaking called homiletics. And I was now in a class where I had to develop 5 outlines of sermons. And I did that. And then I went home in the church where I attended. I said, hey, could you preach on this Sunday? I said, sure. And I've got 5 sermons, so I'll just choose one. And he says, I worked on this one sermon. And he says, then I got up front to speak. But then I suddenly was looking at everybody. And suddenly I realized I know them and they know me. And suddenly he said, everything about that sermon, I totally forgot. The only good thing was I had the outline. But the outline, I just started reading it. But it took me only about 4 minutes or less to read it. And I was finished reading the sermon type that I was going to be doing expanding. So what do? Do you go sit down? I thought, no. So I opened up, turned the page, and I read the second outline. And that took me another 3 or 4 minutes. Now I've been up here for 7 minutes maybe, and I've got 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So I said, I read the third outline. I still haven't calmed down. I'm still nervous. Now I've spoken for maybe 12 minutes. He said, so I thought, better turn the page. And I read the fourth one. And I was finished it. And I've spoken for 16 minutes, maybe, or something like that. He says, then I come to the last one. And you know what? It took me maybe 4 minutes. He says, by the end of 20 minutes, I had used all 5 outlines and spoke at different parts of the Bible, and they weren't all coherent together. They're all very different topics. And he said, he's telling this story, how he was not prepared as he thought. And he began to just read the outlines because that's all he had. And he's totally in panic mode. He's telling the story, and the guy was a great storyteller. And we're just laughing our heads off because it was funny. Glad it happened to him, not to me. It was hilarious. You see, that can be a disadvantage of this mode of delivery. Forgetting some content. Well, that's basically similar to not being well prepared and just end up reading the outlines majorly because you forgot. You know, so instead of telling the story of the little girl lying in bed with the grandmother and the doctor walking in, you say the doctor walked in, grandmother was holding the baby, child was sick, end of story. It wasn't the end of the story. It didn't make a whole lot of sense. And so you need to be aware that it's a great mode of delivery, but it also has disadvantages. Well, now this one here is a fourth one, and you're not going to use this in this class. If we were meeting in the classroom together, you might. And what I would do, impromptu, is the mode of delivery involves unplanned moments when the speaker is asked to speak on a thought or topic that they likely know something about. So in the moment. And so sometimes I depending on size of class, I'll have a class session where I know I've got space and I don't have to worry about time because I'm in good spot in my syllabus. And so I say, today we're going to do something a little bit different. Everybody just put your books away. Okay. We're going to do impromptu speaking. Here's how it's going to work. I'm going to go sit in the back. I'm going to call out your name. You won't know when that'll happen. You don't know what I'm going to ask you. I have listened to your speeches, and I've got a question for each one of you. I'm going to have you go up front. You're going to stand behind the podium. You're going to look at me. I'm going to give a question, and then you're going to speak for 1 minute. 1.5 minutes maximum. So I go back to the room, and I sit down, and I say, okay, Larry. Larry goes, goes up front. Larry, you spoke about blah, 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 blah. Here's a question. Go ahead and answer it, Larry. You've got now 1 minute or 1.5 minutes, whatever I decide to have. That's impromptu. You know about the topic. You've already demonstrated you know about the topic. Now I'm asking a question off of something you spoke about, something different, but connected to a topic you've given. That's impromptu. You do not have to worry about that. We will not be doing that in this class. Advantages to this mode, and there are advantages and disadvantages. One, it reveals what you are like under unplanned circumstances. You didn't have a chance to prepare. How do you feel getting up front, not having any time to prepare? The fact is that many of us, or all of us, are prepared in a different way from life experience. Now, in the moment, you're supposed to speak on this. A second advantage, it will show a mastery of the subject matter. It'll show a mastery of the subject matter that you have. You are speaking on something you know about. Maybe you've traveled from a foreign country to come here and to learn English as a second language or learn language. And now you speak with some level of proficiency. Well done to all of you who have to do that sort of thing. I'll ask a question off that. You have mastery of that topic because you've been living that reality, and now you have a mastery of that topic. And we'll see your mastery. It teaches how to think on your own feet. Reality is that sometimes we have to say something now. We can't say, excuse me, it's a 1-minute speech. I was wondering if you could give me 5 minutes. I'll be right back. No. You have to speak on the topic now. You have to respond now to it. And it teaches you how to think on your feet. Now, if you ever decide to do a doctoral degree, a doctor of education, a doctor of philosophy degree, you have to do a research project, which I did. And it's called a dissertation. And that took me 2 years to complete that. And when it was done, and my professors all signed off saying, I've done everything, but now I just have to have the oral defense on this. And so in that room, you have 5 professors and you make a presentation on your research, and they've already been reading all along, so they have some understanding, but not to the level you do. And after you've spoken for about 10 minutes, they then have a defense. They ask questions about it, and they want to see if you understand it because you're the expert on the topic. My topic was on job satisfaction, job dissatisfaction. Okay, motivation in the workplace. That was my topic. I knew it forward and backwards, and I was able to stand on my own 2 feet as they spoke and asked questions, and I was able to answer. I was the professional, and I had to demonstrate my understanding of the topic. It was impromptu. I knew the material. I didn't know what sort of questions they were going to ask. There are disadvantages of this mode of delivery. There are disadvantages up to this mode of delivery that you have to be aware. And that's one reason I wouldn't use it at this point very much with you, because I want you to get the science, the principles, and then develop yourself those before I take you to a higher level course doing this. It discourages planned research. It can. I mean, if you're going to ask me a question, I can say, oh, I kind of did a little bit, but I haven't had to do anymore. So you're not really prepared. So it's not well planned. It needs to be well planned. And so it can really do something in the whole issue of discouraging planned research. It can also discourage detailed preparation for a speech. It's not just the one thing to have a plan, but now you need to have done a great deal of preparation of laying out all of the structure of it, the direction of it, the focus of it. All that kind of just gets thrown out the window, and you can't afford that. It also discourages audience analysis, because you're doing it in the moment. So, you don't have research, you don't have preparation, and you don't think about your audience in an analysis and analytic way. And that's absolutely critical and absolutely necessary. And so we have these modes of delivery that we give. There's the manuscript. It has advantages. It has disadvantages. There is the memorized. Equally, it has great advantages, and it can and does have disadvantages. And then the extemporaneous mode of delivery. And it's the one that I'm most favorable about using because I understand myself. And you have to go back. You have to think about what way do I want to do this? And then, of course, one day you may be called upon to do an impromptu speech. It could be at a wedding. Somebody says, "Oh, we see Harry's here. Harry, could you come up here? And we'd like you to do this." And you're gonna go like, "Whoa!" Could be any number of places. I've had, in the moment, I've been asked to get up and to make a presentation on something. I remember once I was asked to go to this place to do a teacher training session that would take me about 45-minute presentation. And the guy that was there said, "You know, the night's early. We're in good shape. Dr. Congo's here. He's making a presentation on whatever it was." He said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask him if he could make a second presentation." Well, fortunately for me, I brought my binder with my PowerPoints because that's what I used back then. Not PowerPoints, but my transparencies, because I didn't have PowerPoint back then. And I was able to pull my transparencies of another presentation. It looked like I was completely organized, but I wasn't. There are times all of us will be called to impromptu. So we have these 4 deliveries, approaches. You need to choose in the next one from the manuscript, memorized, impromptu. Which one are you going to use? And you have to make that decision for yourself. You have 3 weeks before we give that speech, so it's a good idea to be thinking about it's an informative speech. You should be ready to, you can Google what does an informative speech look like to get a little more information. And we're going to be talking about that coming up in a couple of days, in a few days. In 2 days from now, I am going to be speaking about self-talk. Okay, that we can help ourselves, we can hurt ourselves with self-talk. And so I'm going to talk about that in a couple of days. So it's time to stop. And thank you for being here with us. And for all those who are going to be watching this, the recording, have a good day too. Take care.